Hello everybody, and thank you for joining us this evening to celebrate the publication of Rupert Jackson's new book, The Roman Occupation of Britain and Its Legacy. It's really lovely, though it is a little bit daunting to see so many people on the call. My name is Georgie Layton, and I'm the Acting Commissioning Editor for Classical Studies and Archaeology at Bloomsbury Academic. And on behalf of Bloomsbury, I'm going to say just a few words to kick things off. So firstly, thank you for tuning in and spending part of your evening with us. It's not quite the launch party we had in mind, and as I'm coming to you live from my kitchen, I think it's safe to say that it's not necessarily in the most glamorous of surroundings, but it is wonderful to be able to mark the occasion with a virtual celebration. The level of interest in this event has been a real testament to the enduring fascination with our ancient past and the depth of meaning that it continues to hold in the present day. And it possibly also suggests the need for some entertaining and informative diversion in these tricky times, and I can confirm that the book itself will provide this in spades. Secondly, and most importantly, many congratulations to Rupert on the official publication day of the book, and on adding yet another achievement to an already impressively long list, this time as a historian rather than a lawyer. I arrived at Bloomsbury quite late on in the proceedings, but looking back to the original book proposal, it was clear from the outset that we had a really exciting project on our hands, and one that fills the gap as a reliable, thoroughgoing, and up-to-date introduction to Roman Britain. The balance between being academically informative and being enjoyably readable is a difficult one to strike, but from the first few pages, it's clear that this is handled admirably, and this is due in no small part to Rupert's engaging good humour. Speaking of a job well done, I really want to quickly mention the wider team here who worked on the book, to whom I want to extend my own sincerest gratitude, and from whom I can also offer our collective congratulations, and thanks for such a smooth and enjoyable path to publication. First and foremost is our publisher, Alice Wright, who signed the book up and was sorry to miss the latter stages while on maternity leave. My fantastic colleagues Lily in editorial and Brenna in marketing who were on the call. Special thanks to Brenna for coordinating the event. And our stalwart production and design team, Rachel, Terry and Merv. As publishers, it's a real pleasure to work with great authors on great content. And Rupert, I hope you're as pleased with the book as we are. So I don't want to take up too much time, as I know everybody is eager to hear from our distinguished speakers. We have Martin Millet, James Renshaw, Rupert himself, and Jules Mann of Classics for All, with whom we're delighted to be collaborating in support of the book. Before I wrap up, just a quick reminder that information about the Roman occupation of Britain and its legacy, including a free-to-view appendix of supplementary information cross-reference to the main text, can be found by searching for the title on Bloomsbury's website, www.bloomsbury.com. Please also keep your microphone muted while you're on the call to make sure there's no audio interference, and do also use the chat function to send over any questions for a brief Q&A session at the end. So thank you for bearing with me, and I'll hand over now to somebody who knows much more about Roman Britain than I do, Professor Martin Millet.
Hello everyone, and thanks Georgina for that introduction. This is a great day, I must say. For me, congratulating Rupert led me to go back through my emails to see how this all started. And for me, it started in May 2013 with an email from my retired colleague, Anthony Bowen in Jesus College, a distinguished language teacher that will be known to people from Classics for All very well. And Anthony sent a characteristically polite and gentle email saying, I've got this man I've known for years as a student who's a lawyer who's interested in Roman Britain. Can you recommend some reading for him? So I sent Anthony a reading list and said, I'm quite happy, always happy to talk to people about Roman Britain. My passion, if it's theirs, let's share it. And as a result of an exchange over the summer of 2013, I met Rupert, I think in October 2013, for a quick chat about what he was thinking of doing. I must say my first impression from an email was, oh gosh, I wonder whether this is really going to work. But over the last 7 years, I've had a whole series of really good discussions with Rupert. Characteristically, he sent me something to read. We would meet for a couple of hours to discuss it and then retire to lunch in the Thai restaurant just round the corner from the Classics faculty for an amusing and enjoyable, relaxed lunch. And as time went on, it became clear that this wasn't just someone coming towards retirement who was trying to think of ways of filling his time, but this really was someone who was a serious student of Roman Britain and had something very interesting to contribute. And I think to understand that, one needs to appreciate Roman Britain then, for me, which is when I was an undergraduate in the 1970s, as opposed to Roman Britain now. Roman Britain then, in the 1970s, was dominated by a generation of scholars, people like Sir Richmond and Shepherd Freer, who'd been brought up learning Greek and Latin since their early school days, were masters of those languages and that literature, and combined that with a knowledge and practice of archaeology. And for people of my generation who weren't taught classics at school, archaeology became a subject in its own right, and rather to, I think, our shame, many of us have focused on subjects like Roman Britain, focusing on the material remains to the cost of the literary evidence. And that's reflected in most of the books that are available on the archaeology of Roman Britain today, which, if they're good on Roman villas and Roman towns, have very little of interest to say on Tacitus or Dio, and omit many of the less well-known sources. At the same time as there's been this burst of energy in exploring Roman Britain through excavation, there have also been new textual sources that have been discovered. Firstly, the Bath and then the Vindolanda tablets, and more recently the amazing set of tablets from London, the Bloomsbury tablets. So it's been clear to me for a long time that we needed a new sort of synthesis of Roman Britain, one that handled the literary and textual evidence with the aplomb of those scholars of my youth, but also managed to engage with the archaeological evidence. And what we've seen in Rupert's book as it's come together is a fine ability to do that. It's a fine ability which combines a great classical training, Cambridge classical training, of course, with an incisive legal mind. And one of the things that really impressed me in talking to Rupert is you would send him a note saying, when you're looking at this, you might consult the following 2 or 3 articles or books. And the next time you saw Rupert, he'd read them all and was summarising them with characteristic legal precision in a paragraph or 2. And what he's done in this book, which is, I think, a fantastic achievement, is to wear that learning very lightly. So it's a very good book to read. It's very accessible. It will be a great thing, I think, for undergraduates and school children. And he combines that with a sense of humour. In every bit of the book, his mischievous sense of humour and reference to the contemporary world shines through. So I would urge you all to go out. My copy dropped through the letterbox this morning, I'm delighted to say. Go out, buy a copy and enjoy it and celebrate what I think is one of the great achievements of the current academic cycle, which is a new book on Roman Britain that combines the old and the new and says things in a way that will bring a new audience to the subject. Thank you so much, Rupert. I'm going to now pass over to James Renshaw, a distinguished classical teacher from Godolphin and Latimer School, who's written widely on Romans and Greeks himself, and who's now going to, I think, say something more on Rupert's fantastic achievement. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. I think hopefully it's come straight on to me and that everyone can hear me, so I will assume that that's the case. It was great to hear Martin's perspective there. And I guess I've been asked to think about Roman Britain from a teacher's perspective today, a school teacher's perspective, and what it has to offer. I was delighted to be asked a few months ago to proofread a final version of Rupert's book by the team at Bloomsbury. I really, really enjoyed it. And I think it's both clear but also deep, if I can use that word. You know, it gets really stuck into the details. And anyone here who's a teacher listening will know that that's pretty much exactly what you want. You want something that's really clear and really straightforward in one sense, but doesn't miss things out. So it's a real privilege to be here. And what I wanted to do was to reflect a little bit about how a teacher can use Roman Britain in particular, you know, in terms of British history, thinking of this from different angles. It doesn't have to be a classics teacher. It could be a teacher teaching history in this country. And I'm going to hopefully share my screen. This is the next plan. And bring that up to you. So hopefully now everyone has got a screen there. It says, "Who are we? Then and now?" ? A Romano-British love story. And this is the story of two people called Regina and Barate. Some of you might know this story. Even if you do, hopefully, I think what I want to think about is the way to approach it as a teacher with students and what they might get from it as 21st century students at the moment, coming back from COVID and all of that stuff, and realizing that the past has always been difficult, perhaps. So the basic story here is that this is a tombstone found in Corbridge, up near Hadrian's Wall. And the woman, we know quite a bit about her because we've got this inscription below. And just take note of the fact that there's a non-Roman script down the bottom there. We'll come to that in a moment. So I suspect Martin or someone like that is looking at this. Anyone who's a professional archaeologist is horrified by this colour coding. I found this off the internet. This is what it looks like on the left. This is someone, though, at least making the effort to show people, look, this is vibrant. And I guess as a teacher, one would start by thinking, well, you know, just look at that. Look at the two options. What can you tell about this woman? We can't see her face. That's been lost. What can we tell about this whole thing? And you might want them to talk about the fact that there's a centre of a temple there. We might want them to think about the fact that it would have cost a lot of money to create this. And then we might think about, you know, what's she doing here? And we've got balls of wool on one side and a jewellery box on the other. So we get very quickly into conversations about women's place. You know, she's seen as being the archetypally good woman, good wife. She's a good spinner of wool, and she's wealthy. That's a really important thing here. And so if I was teaching this, I would say, well, look, it was a bit of Latin down here, but there's something else. Let's think about that. And we might go into the next slide. And if you're teaching Latin, you can introduce this. If you're not, you can still show them the Latin and perhaps get them to think about different words there. But you've got the translation. And of course, the lower bit is Palmyrene. And there it is transliterated. So the whole thing in the Latin says, to the spirits that departed, and to Regina, his freedwoman and wife, a Catabalaunian by tribe, age 30, Barates of Palmyra set this up. And then below, in his own native script, because he's from Syria, Barates says, Regina, the freedwoman of Barates, alas. So there's a huge amount to unwrap here for a teacher, possibly, or for students to think about. She's only 30. She started her life as a slave. She ends her life seemingly wealthy with this jewellery box and with a very, very fancy tomb set up for her. She is the liberta of Barates, which suggests that he might have bought her. And one of my teaching challenges here would be to think, well, how much can we be certain of, and how much are we guessing, and how reliable are our guesses, and that kind of thing. And so then we think, well, you know, if she was his slave, how does this work? He's come to Britain. We're going to find out in a moment from with the Roman army from Syria. Has he bought her? And in which case, you know, he set up this beautiful tomb, but actually he bought her as a slave. And, you know, we can get into conversations around perhaps forced slavery, even modern slavery. You know, was it love in his mind? What was going on in her mind? You know, there are all sorts of possibilities there, and we'll never know the answer. But it's really interesting to explore those possibilities. And perhaps it's a mixture of everything, that there was love there, but there was also a master and slave relationship and a freed relationship. So again, exploring that second script, the Palmyrene script, that it's, I believe, a Semitic script, and thinking about the links there to other Semitic scripts and parts of the world. And of course, at the moment, sadly, Palmyra has been in the news for very sad reasons. So you can then move into a conversation about the importance of archaeology, about iconoclasm. You can even, talk about what ISIS did in Palmyra. But then also get students to think about, how far has this guy come? He's ended up all the way up here, and he started out over here somewhere, down there. There it is, look. He came with the Roman army. So lots of thoughts there. I don't want to be too political here, but I think it's important to talk about immigration and migration, and people coming to Britain from all over the Roman Empire, and particularly actually probably from Syria, I think, with some of the legions, and thinking about that, but also maybe in Regina's story, she probably migrated from southern England, Hertfordshire, up to the north, which would have been a big journey for herself. It's worth thinking about her name, Regina. She wasn't a queen. Presumably that was the name that Sparates gave to her, if he had originally owned her. So his queen, which sounds very romantic. I teach girls, I think they'd want to think that was romantic, but we might want to just be a bit cautious there. So thinking about the size of the empire and the journey, and how he might have made that journey with the legions. And then, of course, the fact that we've got by this extraordinary stroke of luck, we seem to have found Barate's tombstone as well, not so far away. Sorry, he was at Corbridge. I've got this wrong. And Regina was at Arbea Fort. So the tombstones are 20-odd miles away, and a much shorter inscription here, to the spirits of the departed, and to Barates, the Palmyran standard bearer, who lived 68 years. So he seems to have been making ensigns or something like that, perhaps after his retirement from the legions. He lives to a good old age in Roman terms. And again, we can think about how much younger might she have been than him. Was he a widower for a long time? And so I think there is so much that you can unwrap with a 21st century, a 2020 class of students, whether they are 11 or whether they're 18. There are so many issues there about, the place of women in the world, about slavery. These are issues that we're talking about today, about migration. And there are no concrete answers, which I think is really important, that they appreciate that, but they learn to kind of work with that and think about the possibilities. So I guess, as a sort of final meditation linked to this, the 2nd century AD is a really interesting time. This wall was built by Hadrian. He's the first non-Italian or Italian native emperor. And by the end of the century, we have the first non-European emperor, Septimius Severus. So again, the idea of Romanness being based around the Mediterranean, being a sort of tri-continental empire, I think is really important and interesting, and speaks to many of our students today. So I hope that gives people a sense of why I think Roman Britain has a huge amount to offer teachers of history, of British history, of classics today, setting aside anything else from the Roman Empire. That it is our history, it's our island's history, if you like, and the Romans were here for 400 years. It's a very important part of our history, and I would really commend Rupert's book as a way of starting to engage with that. Absolutely. So thank you. Now I need to hand over to someone, and I have to confess, I need to stop sharing the screen as well. Let's try doing escape. There we go. Stop sharing. And Rupert, am I handing over to you at this point? Have I got that right?
Yes.
Okay, so I will switch my microphone off and welcome the man of the moment, Sir Rupert Jackson.
Thank you very much, James. First of all, may I welcome you all to this book launch. I'm sorry that I can't serve drinks and nibbles for you all, but I hope you all have your own refreshments at your side. This book is dedicated to my 6 grandchildren. 2 of them you can see in the background. At the moment, they are perhaps a little young to read it, but I hope that they and their 4 cousins will all enjoy it in due course. I think they might start getting noisy unless they're removed in the near future.
They would never do that.
Now, as you have just seen, James is an inspirational classics teacher. And Martin, who spoke first, is the foremost authority on Roman Britain, holding a prestigious chair at Cambridge. I, by contrast, come to this subject as an enthusiastic amateur. I first encountered Roman Britain in the 1960s as one of many volunteers helping to excavate a Roman cemetery in Chichester and a villa in the South Downs. At the same time, I was studying classics at university. What fascinated me then, and fascinated me now, is the extent to which Britain, a remote island in the north, is discussed by ancient authors. We even get a mention in Herodotus. He described Britain as an island which exported tin. Well, things have moved on since the 1960s. I have spent 50 years in the law, but I have never lost my enthusiasm for classics. In recent years, Martin Millet has guided my reading on Roman Britain and opened my eyes to some of, indeed many, of the issues. I have a huge amount to thank Martin for. I also thank him for his generous words this evening, and I also thank James for his fascinating talk and generous words. Over the last few years, long-suffering friends and family members have accompanied me on countless expeditions to Roman sites around the country, including, of course, a walk along Hadrian's Wall. The product of all that endeavour is this book. This book does not and cannot compete with the scholarly works on different aspects of Roman Britain which pour out of universities every year. I have this week been reading yet another one, this time on Bath, and I note that the author of that work, like the author of so many other works, begins by thanking Martin for the guidance and teaching which Martin has provided. So this book cannot compete with all those scholarly tomes. It does something different. Drawing on the ancient texts and modern scholarship, this book tells the whole story within a very tight word limit as set by Bloomsbury. Well, I might have exceeded it slightly, but not a lot. We start with the Iron Age and Caesar's invasion in the mid-1st century. That invasion won Caesar great prestige and helped him on his path to the top position in Rome. It is striking how often Britain played a major part in the politics of the empire. A century later, a newly appointed emperor, Claudius, needed a quick military victory to boost his reputation. Conquering Britain was the answer. So he sent a task force across the Channel, and annexed southern Britain as a new province. Claudius even popped over himself for a couple of weeks to watch some of the fighting and, of course, to claim all the glory. Over the next 50 years, Rome gained control of what are now England and Wales, but it never gained control of Scotland, hence the construction of Hadrian's Wall. which became the northern frontier of the empire, the most formidable barrier on any of the imperial frontiers. Hadrian's Wall is now the largest surviving monument of the Roman Empire. In the early 3rd century, Britain became centre stage. For almost 3 years, the Emperor Severus, who James was talking about a few minutes ago, had his headquarters in York. Boris Johnson keeps talking about moving the House of Lords to York, but Severus was much more ambitious. He administered the whole of Western Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa, from what are now the precincts of York Minster. Why on earth did he do that? Because he was trying to conquer Scotland. That project failed, and Severus died in AD 211, possibly with some help from his son Caracalla. Caracalla and his brother Geta duly succeeded to power, and once Caracalla had assassinated his brother, he then became sole emperor. A century later, another emperor died in York, and Constantine was proclaimed his successor. As everyone knows, Constantine completely transformed the Roman Empire. He also ordered a U-turn in religious policy. U-turns are very fashionable nowadays. Constantine got them going. Suddenly, all these persecutions stopped. Christians were free from persecution, and Christianity became the top religion. And as I mentioned, it was Constantine who acceded to power in Britain. Time and again, Britain features at the great moments in the power politics of the empire. Away from imperial politics and policy, this book describes the lives of ordinary people. What was life like in the countryside, the deep countryside, where 90% of the population lived? Agricultural production increased, a wide variety of foodstuffs became available. How yummy, you may all be thinking. Well, sadly, it was only the elites who benefited. A recent multidisciplinary study shows that for the mass of the rural population, diets actually declined, and there was an increase of disease and tooth decay. So if they, the mass of rural population in Britain, were asked Monty Python's famous question, "What did the Romans ever do for us?" their answer would be not a lot. The towns tell a different story. They were developed on the Roman model, with temples, bathhouses, forum, and basilica. The old aristocracy of the Iron Age retained their preeminence, but now they were magistrates or local senators with fancy titles. Ironically, the Roman occupation reinforced the traditional power structures. Let me now say something about writing style. It can be hard work reading through many pages of narrative history, even if the text is enlivened with a few Latin quotations. Certainly in my case, the eyes tend to glaze over. I have therefore introduced some humour whenever opportunities arose. I have also done my best to make the book readable and enjoyable. One recurrent theme is the brutality of Roman imperialism. The mindset and the moral compass of the ancient world were completely different from our own. But with one exception, I have steered away from repeated condemnation and made my point by understatement or bathos. The one exception is in chapter 7, which describes the savagery of the army after the Battle of Mons Gropius. We get the details of that episode from the historian Tacitus, whose father-in-law was the victorious general. Another theme is the contemporary relevance of much that happened in the Roman period. The foundation of London as our capital city is just one example. Some of the issues in the ancient world have their counterparts today, in particular how Britain should relate to its continental neighbours. Our decision to drop out of the empire in AD 409 was a form of Brexit. I hope that those of you who buy this book will gain as much enjoyment from reading it as I have gained from writing it. The main financial purpose of this first edition is to raise money for a charity called Classics for All. Of course, much of the royalties will go in tax, and there are some expenses to cover. But after all that, the main beneficiary of the net proceeds will be Classics for All, which Classics for All promotes and funds the teaching of classics in state schools, especially in areas of social deprivation. Jules Mann, the chief executive of Classics for All, will now tell you about its work. And I will mute my microphone.
Thank you very much, Rupert. And I don't know if you can see it, but on the back of the book, there is a logo, Classics for All. So, and I'd like to really thank Bloomsbury for working with us on promoting that as well. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with our charity, as Rupert said, we have, we're about leveling the playing field in terms of access to classics. And we've helped over 900 state schools, many in some of the most deprived areas of the UK, to offer Latin, ancient Greek, ancient history, and classical civilization. So our vision is that every pupil in state schools across the UK should have the opportunity to study classical subjects, regardless of their background or their ability. Now, to do this, we don't just parachute in. We actually go into the schools and work with the pupils. We train the teachers in the school to work with the pupils in the classical subjects. Now, this helps the teachers as well as the pupils. It gives them the ability to sustain the subject year on year and cohort on cohort. And very often they end up expanding what they started when they see the effect on pupils' language development or cultural literacy. So we're a small team at Classics for All, and we now achieve our work thanks to we have 16 regional networks. And on the topic of tonight's discussion and the wonderful book by Rupert, we work with two networks in particular around Roman Britain. So Leicester has published their own wonderful book about Leicester itself and is being used in the classrooms there. And in fact, there's a school that's taking their pupils, all their pupils from age 11 to 14, studying classics. So it's very big and important subject in Leicester. Warwick as well has just we've worked with them to develop some GCSE and A-level resources on Roman Britain to put on their website. And since March, they told me that they've received 70,000 visits to those web pages. So it's a very dynamic and growing subject, and they both were very excited about Rupert's book coming along and what that means for them to work with in the classroom. I just thought I'd share a few little brief nuggets of feedback directly from our grant recipients so you get an idea of what Classics for All does and the impact of it. We had a parent of a primary school student who participated in an online classroom that we had to put on at a moment's notice because of COVID. And she said, my daughter's really quite dyslexic, but working with the Greek bizarrely has suited her, and she's really taken to the grammar. So as well as enjoying the sessions. The study of these have boosted her confidence too. Now that resonates with a deputy head teacher at Brymore Academy in Bristol who wrote to us to say initial responses to Latin have been really enthusiastic across all abilities. It's a great leveler as everybody is starting from the same baseline, so this gives lower ability students confidence. Now, up in Blackpool, we have a fantastic coordinator of our network up there, Peter Wright, and he said, if it wasn't for Classics for All, we wouldn't have 9 schools delivering Latin or classics. We wouldn't have 13 teachers trained up to deliver those subjects. And we wouldn't have over 500 students every week engaged in Latin or classics. Now, just to show you a little progression, we have a little quote from a Blackpool 6th form college student who went on from Blackpool this year, and he told us, doing classics at 6th form was an amazing opportunity for me, and I'm now going to Sydney Sussex College in Cambridge to study archaeology and Egyptology. Well, he wasn't the only one from Blackpool to go on to higher education, coming directly out of this classics work, and not the only one to be the first one in his family to go on to higher education. So we're doing work all over the country like this. Those are just a few examples. Like all charities, we've been knocked back by COVID, but we leaped into action to offer as much support online as we could. And this year, we've totted up that we'll reach another 100 new schools. So by the end of 2020, which is our 10th anniversary year, we will have helped 1,000 state schools, and that's at least 60,000 pupils whose lives have now been enriched by classics. So how do we do all of this? We receive no core government funding. Our charity runs on donations. Every year we raise new funds from individuals, trusts, and foundations. And we appreciate regular givers, like our group of lawyers group donors, who nearly 150 of them who give to us every year. And we're obviously grateful to Rupert's example of dedicating proceeds from this book to Classics for All. And last but not least, we're actually marking our 10th anniversary with an unanticipated fundraising campaign called Classics at the Time of COVID, and it's just launched this week. So do visit our website, classicsforall.org.uk, for more detail. And thank you very much again to Bloomsbury, and especially to Rupert, for this book and for your help in contributing to Classics for All. Now, I think some of you have been sending questions, or if you haven't yet, jump onto the chat room and start, and I'll turn over to Brenna to handle the questions.
Yeah, that's right. Well, firstly, thank you, Rupert, for joining us and telling us a little bit more about your book. It's been really interesting to hear from you. And likewise for Martin, James, it's been really interesting to hear all of your perspectives. So we have a little bit of time for questions. So if you do have any for Rupert or for any of the speakers, please put them in our chat box. I have a few that I want to pose to the group. So the first one has come in to us from Damien Duran, and I believe this is for you, Rupert. And he has said, if Cornwall provided one of only 2 sources of tin in the empire, why do you think there is so little evidence of occupation to exploit and defend the tin resource?
Gosh, that's quite a difficult question. I'm sure that Martin...
I've thrown you in the deep end.
Well, it was right out there in the southwest peninsula where the Dumnonii were exploiting it. They had been exploiting it since the Bronze Age, or certainly since the early Iron Age. And they were making a nice little profit out of it. What was the question? Why wasn't it more defended? Was that the question?
Yes. So if Cornwall provided one of only 2 sources of tin in the empire, why is there so little evidence of occupation to exploit and defend the tin resource?
Well, when Pythias visited Britain in the, it was about 300, or Martin will correct me if I'm wrong, he found a vibrant tin industry flourishing there. Merchants were exporting the tin from Britain. It was being, I think, moved by traders across Europe to the Mediterranean. I don't think that the tin industry was coming under attack. It was providing much needed tin. As I say, that's the one reference that we get in Herodotus. But what would Martin say?
I think one of the issues is that because tin has been exploited in the 2,000 years since the Roman period, there's a tendency with all mineral resources for the later workings to obscure the Roman ones and actually to dig them away in many cases. And I suspect that combined with the sort of landscape in Cornwall, which is very heavily pastoral, where it's quite difficult to find rural sites, is contributing to a lack of information, a lack of knowledge.
Great, thank you. Well, I actually had a question myself, and I suppose it's why Roman Britain? So what was it that drew you to Britain specifically rather than any of the other provinces?
That drew me to Britain?
Mm-hmm.
Well, as I say, I'm fascinated by the extent to which it features in the writings of the ancient authors when you consider how far it was from what people then regarded as the centre of civilization. Secondly, I'm fascinated by the extent of the remains of Roman Britain, which are all around us, and by its massive impact on modern Britain. Of course, much of our road system has its origins in the roads designed by the Roman occupying forces. I've just always found it an intriguing subject. But Martin has made it his life's work, while I defected to the law for 50 years. So Martin can perhaps give a fuller answer.
I think one of the key things is we all live here, and it's part of our history, as James sort of emphasised. I'm fascinated. I do work in other parts of the Roman Empire as well, but I'm always interested in how Rome interacted with my ancestors in this country.
Thank you. That's very interesting. So we have a question here from Julian Bailey, who has asked, how do we learn more about Roman Britain? Is it knowledge that comes from digs? Or are there kind of other sources that are giving us insight into Roman Britain?
Well, every now and then there is a major discovery which sheds a whole new shaft of light on Roman Britain. The most recent discovery is, of course, the Bloomsbury tablets, which Martin mentioned in his opening remarks, which are hugely informative about the way traders operated in London, and sometimes they relate to what was going on elsewhere. Other events which really increase our knowledge are the discovery of the curse tablets, particularly at Bath, a huge number of them, the Vindolanda tablets up close to Hadrian's Wall. But in addition to these periodic events which really add a large chunk to our knowledge, there is the steady field work and investigation exposing Roman sites around the country. Martin and his team are doing a huge amount of work at Aldborough, which was one of the Civitas capitals. Long and slow work. Martin and Rose and their team have spent many years excavating Aldborough, but adding substantially to our body of knowledge. So I would say we've always had the ancient texts, and I've given a lot of attention to the ancient texts. What we're getting now is a steady accretion of knowledge from excavations, and on top of that, of course, we have the occasional mega events like the Bloomsbury tablets. But maybe James or Martin would have more to say in answer to Julian's question. Julian's an old friend of mine. I knew he was going to ask something difficult.
I don't think there's very much to add to that, Rupert. I think the important thing with field work is that a lot of the work that's done at the moment is done as a result of development. So the Bloomsbury site in London, for instance, was excavated because they were rebuilding the office block, and the developer then pays for the archaeological work. So over the last 20 years, a lot of the new archaeological information has come as a result of things like office building, house building, current work, for instance, with the high-speed rail link up into the Midlands, producing lots of new information.
Thank you very much. So we have another question from Madeline Reardon, who has asked, how common was it for those from elsewhere in the empire to immigrate and settle in Britain, and what were the things that drew them there?
Well, a lot of people from elsewhere in the empire had no choice but to come here because they had been conscripted to serve as auxiliaries in the Roman army, and Britain was where they were sent. There was a large occupying army here for much of the Roman period. Indeed, I think 12% of the Roman army was guarding 4% of the Roman Empire. So we were quite, we involved quite a heavy investment of resources, and a lot of auxiliaries were sent here from Germany or Gaul or wherever, Pannonia or wherever they came from. Secondly, traders came here, bringing their wares from Europe and taking produce back to Europe. And we see references to traders in some of the tablets which have been mentioned. And then again, there are slaves who would be brought here. James gave us the example of one slave in his fascinating talk, where we saw her tombstone and saw that she had struck lucky and gone on to marry well and live and gain great respect in Britain. So there were a variety of ways people came here. But again, I think James or Martin might add to that.
I think probably Martin's better qualified, but yeah, I mean, certainly the legions, I would say. I don't know how many slaves, I guess it's difficult for us to know how many slaves would have been imported to Britain. Martin, maybe that would be an interesting topic to think about.
I think the general view is that you will have a few slaves coming in with officials and sort of military commanders and so forth, but generally speaking, the flow of slaves is probably going the other way, that people defeated in warfare tend to be enslaved and therefore sort of leave the country. I think 10 or 20 years ago, we rather underestimated the number of people coming in through trading and as administrators and so forth. There's been a lot of work done in the last few years looking at the skeletal remains from Roman Britain, which is tending to suggest that there's rather more ordinary mobility amongst people trading and sort of moving round than we had hitherto expected. But I think the dominant force in that is always going to be the army and the administration.
Thank you, that's very interesting. So we have a question from Lynn, who lives near Vericonium, and she asks how significant a site it is in the Roman occupation.
Which site? I didn't hear the question, sorry. Which place?
So this is from Lynn, who lives near Vericonium, so the site that's featured on the cover. How significant a site it is in the Roman occupation?
I think I'd ask Martin to go for that one first.
Well, it's one of the major towns. It's the sort of main Roman administrative centre for the Welsh Marches. So there are sort of 20 or so regional administrative centres in Roman Britain, and Vericonium is one of them. It is the most important in the sort of Middle West, if you like.
I would agree with that, and of course the remains there are quite spectacular.
Indeed, it's the old work that's on the cover, isn't it? Which is part of the sort of central bath buildings of the town.
Yes.
While we're kind of discussing you, Rupert, and also to the other speakers, what some of your favourite sites from Roman Britain? What are they?
My favourite sites from Roman Britain. One of my favourite sites is Bignor Roman Villa, which is a delightful villa set in the South Downs, close to Stane Street, which ran from London down to Chichester. It's got very well preserved mosaics, including the exquisite mosaic of gladiators being trained. You see the two trainee gladiators chained to a block. They're having their fight, one with the sort of fork item and so on. And one of the two trainee gladiators wins, and in the last of the four scenes, you see the defeated trainee lying on the ground, blood gushing out, and the victorious trainee coming in for the kill, which prompts the question that if this is how the practical exercises were done at gladiator school, how many of the trainees actually survived to graduate? But there are other fabulous mosaics there, so that is undoubtedly one of my favourite sites. Another one, corny though it sounds, is Hadrian's Wall. I have walked the length of Hadrian's Wall with a relative who I think is watching this this event, and it is a quite stunning monument. All the more impressive because it's usually extremely windy and extremely wet, and gives you an impression of life on the northern frontier. Those are my two favourite sites, and perhaps I would make Vindolanda the third. James, what is yours?
Well, that's a great question, and it actually just gives me the opportunity to sort of mention something else that's been happening because of COVID, which is Fishbourne Palace, because we take, go off in Latin, we take our year 8s there, which ties in neatly with the Cambridge Latin course, and that's a great. I mean, Bath is a great site. We take them to both, but I think I'd just like to take this moment to kind of mention and commend Fishbourne as a wonderful site. Martin might know more about this, but it's really struggling in the COVID era. So if anyone's got a spare $500,000 out there who's listening, Martin, maybe you could tell us a bit more about where that is with Fishbourne at the moment, because it's a jewel, isn't it, of Roman Britain?
It is a jewel, and it's fantastic Roman villa palace with very, very fine early mosaics, and it's run by a charity, the Sussex Archaeological Society. And in common with so many other charitable organisations who are sort of self-funded, the COVID situation has just knocked them completely sideways, and it's very difficult to see how they can continue to make ends meet. So with James, I very much hope that someone can help bail them out, because they've done it was opened to the public in, I think, 1969 first, after Barry Cunliffe's excavations in the 1960s, and it has inspired generations and generations of students school children who've visited it.
Yeah, if I can come back on that and just say, I mean, it is a brilliant place to take a school group, and they do a wonderful teaching and handling sessions, and just seeing. Normally they have a kind of bowl of different objects and they have to guess what they are, because some of them aren't obvious. They're bones of cattle or whatever. And that's real education. We like being in the classroom at the moment because we haven't done it for 5 months. But when you can get out in the field and get them handling stuff that's 2,000 years old, it is so exciting. So that, I think, at the moment, from a kind of heartfelt point of view, is my favourite site, but it's one I hope that will survive.
Yeah. I'm going to put in a plea for the sort of civilian areas of the Roman North, which I'm particularly fond of, and I would nominate Rudston up on the Yorkshire Wolds, which is quite a modest Roman villa, but with most extraordinary set of mosaics, which are now in Hull Museum. Hull is not shall we say, generally on the tourist route. It's a bit out on a limb and rather a depressed city, but the museums in Hull have the most stupendous collection of Roman archaeology, including the mosaics from Brudston, and they really are, as Misha would say, worth a detour.
Thank you. Those all sound excellent. So I have a question here from David, who's asked, so Romans left Britain in around 410 AD, but was this a gradual withdrawal, and how much influence did Romans have in Britain after this time?
The evidence about the ending of Roman Britain is fairly sparse. The great historians who provide a lot of detail about other periods of Romano-British history are not available to help us here. We have a single sentence from the historian Zosimus, which I've quoted in both Greek and English, you'll be pleased to hear, in chapter 16. He says that the Britons resolved to throw off Roman rule and live by themselves, no longer obeying Roman laws. Well, that's extremely helpful, but it would have been nice if he'd given us more than one sentence. We can trace the decline in the Roman presence here from archaeological evidence. We can see when gold and silver coins stopped coming and when bronze coins stopped coming to pay the army, and we can look at the evidence of the deterioration of towns. And I think that the general consensus points towards an ending of Roman Britain or Roman control over Britain in about AD 409. We know that the Goths sacked Rome in AD 210, and throughout the late 4th century and early 5th century, troops were being withdrawn from Britain to defend the empire, or were being withdrawn from Britain by rebel emperors trying to establish power bases in Gaul. So Britain's departure from the empire was a gradual process, and at the same time Britain was coming under raids from Saxons and others by sea, and was getting less and less protection from the imperial armies. So there was to some extent a withdrawal of officials and troops by Rome. To some extent, if Zosimus is right, there was a positive decision by the indigenous Britons that they weren't going to heed the instructions of the Roman authorities anymore. The tax system came to an end in the first decade of the 5th century. And as for Roman influence after AD 409 or 410, there are suggestions that the Rome came back to provide assistance on occasions, but they're not really borne out. I think Martin will be able to add to this from the archaeological evidence.
Well, the difficulty with the archaeological evidence is that once Roman coinage stops and the last bulk Roman coinage comes in down to AD 402, it becomes very, very difficult to date things. So there's increasing evidence in areas in the north, particularly Birdoswald on Hadrian's Wall and various of the other sites in the north, that elements of Roman power probably linger on through the 5th century, but actually tying down what's happening is very difficult. Whereas in the south and east, it's pretty clear that things break up at an earlier stage. And I think what Rupert's saying perfectly correctly is there are sort of elements of Roman withdrawal and the sort of indigenous rejection of Rome. But I suspect it's also a pattern of greater regionalisation and localisation. So what's happening in what's now Northumberland or Yorkshire, very different from what's happening in Kent or Cornwall. And that's one of the reasons that it's very difficult to sort of see a clear pattern coming through. less evidence, less visibility, and fragmentation.
Thank you for those answers. So we probably only have time for a couple more questions, so I'll try and get through these as quickly as possible. So we had a question from Cheyenne Clare, who asked you, Rupert, to name the book that you're reading on Roman Bath.
Oh, it's an excellent book. I'll just get it off my bookshelf. Sorry for the delay, not very slick presentation of that. I have just been reading this excellent book entitled The Sanctuary at Bath in the Roman Empire, written by a lady called Ellery Cousins. I have just written a review of the book, which you can see on the Classics for All website. I would add that the Classics for All website has many immense benefits, and one of them is a huge number of book reviews. I was very impressed by this book. It provides a completely novel interpretation of the evidence concerning Roman Bath. It suggests that, contrary to the views of all the great classicists and archaeologists, during the Roman period, Bath was not a healing sanctuary at all. People didn't come to Bath to improve their health, as they have done in more recent times. Instead, it was a religious sanctuary and a way of projecting imperial power in Roman Britain. That very brief summary hardly does justice to an extremely learned and thorough book. This book, which I've just finished reading, is typical of the huge number of really excellent scholarly works pouring out of the universities, I should probably say every month rather than every year. And this author, like so many others, begins by thanking Martin for instructing her and pointing her in the right direction. There's a constant stream of literature about Roman Britain. Many scholars are working on different aspects of the subject, but I would certainly encourage your questioner to read this particular book.
Can I just say that Ellery was a brilliant PhD student here and is now teaching Roman history and archaeology at the University of Lancaster.
Have you read her book, Martin?
I have indeed.
Sorry, I shouldn't ask. I just wondered, because you get so many books from your students pouring in every week.
I always read my students' books. They're one of the great pleasures of teaching.
Do you agree with her thesis?
Yes, largely.
Thank you. A double recommendation there. Okay, so I'm just going to shoot two more questions your way before we finish. So one of them is from Peter, who kind of picked up on your interest in literary sources, Rupert. And he asked the lost books of let me just find the question. Ammianus Marcellinus would give us further insights into Roman Britain. And are there any other literary sources that you'd like to find?
Yes. First of all, there are gaps in the work of Ammianus, and those gaps are much regretted. Also, of course, there are gaps in Tacitus. We've got a passage in Tacitus saying that he won't weary us with a repetition of his earlier account of Roman Britain, but sadly the account to which he's referring has vanished. And of course some of the books of Dio Cassius have gone as well. What both classicists and archaeologists have to do is to piece together the story from the literary fragments which survive almost by chance. It's almost random which ones have and which ones haven't, and marry them up on the rare occasions that it is possible with the archaeological sources. Occasionally we do get a marrying up, such as the Togiodugnos in Chichester, who features in an inscription in North Street, Chichester, and also features in Tacitus. and who may well have occupied Fishbourne Roman Palace, about which James and Martin were talking. But we're really piecing together the story from fragments. But again, I'm sure James and Martin would add to that.
I have nothing to add. I think any new discovery of a literary or written source is a gem for Roman Britain.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the same as for children. I always say, you could be the one that finds the lost plays of Sophocles in the desert, or whatever it is, and it's the same. There's the library in Herculaneum, and who knows of how much of Tacitus might possibly be in there, or another library that's buried. I mean, that would be thrilling, but we just have to live in hope.
I agree.
Absolutely. Okay, Rupert, I have a final question for you before we finish up, and that is to ask you what your plans are now that the book is out. Are you working on a new project? What's on the table for you?
Well, it must be admitted that I'm still working as a lawyer, and classics is my recreation. I shall undoubtedly set about another literary project, and I'm giving thought to what it should be. But I actually wanted to see how this book goes down first, see whether the style is okay and the approach is okay. And if I get a lot of savaging from the critics, I will know what I have to do next. But yes, I shall continue working in. I've retired as a judge, but I continue to sit as an arbitrator. I shall go on doing that, and in my spare time, I shall be pursuing my classical interests and hopefully writing another book, which I hope will be of interest to Bloomsbury.